Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. So today, as you can see, I'll be inking this dragon, and I'm doing a little voiceover work because the audio on the original videos did not turn out the way that I wanted. So before I get started with the narration here, I just wanted to mention that for those of you watching this on YouTube, this will be a shortened version. If you'd like to see the full-length version and see me ink this dragon all the way through, you can check out the description box below. There's a link to my Patreon, patreon.com/Luke.Ink. And most of the videos that you find here on YouTube, I do a extended version for my patrons over on Patreon. So go ahead and check that out if you're interested. And I'll get back to narrating my work here. So as you can see, I've got this dragon that I've penciled in. I just used a kind of a plain old mechanical pencil. I think the lead was HB. And when it comes to using layout pencils, I'm not too fussy. I'll use anything from an old number 2 pencil to just have a drawer of miscellaneous art pencils, and I just look for something that's not going to be too dark on the paper. The main quality that I look for in pencils is that I can erase it well, because I'm just using it to get the rough idea down on paper, and then after the ink is dry, I just come through and erase all that pencil out. So the paper I'm using is Canson watercolor paper, 140 pound. That's, I believe, the same paper that I use in most of my videos on here. It's just a nice kind of mid-range. It's a good quality, but not too expensive. I think you can pick up a tablet, depending on the size of the paper. You can get a tablet of, I think this is 9 by 12 inch, and you can pick it up for about 15-20 bucks. And it doesn't break the bank, but it's pretty good quality. And the ink I'm using is Speedball Super Black, the same ink that I'm usually using in these videos. The pen nib is a Leonard 111, I believe. And it's a nib that I don't normally use. Once in a while, I like to just rummage through my drawer of nibs and pull out something that I've not used in a long time, or maybe never have used. And this one works pretty good. I think I do switch it up here in a few minutes because it's more ideal for detail work, at least the type of inking that I do. And I keep on going with it for a few minutes, but eventually I'll trade it up. So the dragon's looking pretty good. I used, when I was coming up with the layout for this dragon, the ideas, I looked through a book of reptile photography that I have, that I use quite often for inspiration. You know, after you draw something for a long time, my dragons tend to kind of look similar, because if you're just drawing from your head, you tend to, after a while, kind of revert back to the same. So every once in a while, I like to pull that book out and just look at pictures of crocodiles, alligators, snakes, turtles, lizards. And those creatures all have really interesting skin textures and scale patterns that you can use to just give you some ideas and maybe go in a direction that you usually don't. So I really recommend using photographs or real life for inspiration, really whenever possible. I know a lot of people have asked me in the past if I use reference materials, and absolutely, yeah. I think all the great masters of the past used life references, certainly. And if photography had been around, I'm 100% certain that those old masters would have used photographs as well. And usually I'm not even something like snake scales or lizard skin patterns. I'm not really going to take it and reproduce it exactly as I see it. I'm just getting ideas, and then I kind of riff on it, go my own direction. So, something I encourage you to do as well. And sometimes just looking at those pictures, if you have no ideas of what to draw, just looking at those pictures can be inspiring. So, yeah, photography, really a fun way to vary it up and, you know, get some cool new ideas for your work. It's coming along pretty good here. As you can see, I'm mainly doing outlining work at this stage of the game. Because of the style of inking that I'm doing on this particular drawing, I can go through and just more or less outline it and then fill in the outlines with my inking later on. So I believe the actual reference materials that I used for this, it was a python. It was either a python or a viper or a little of both for some of the scales, particularly around the mouth. And also there's a little bit of lizard thrown in there as well, some kind of lizard. And one thing I noticed looking at this is I tend to always put the eye position is critical for me, like when I'm doing a layout. And I like to position the eye a little bit more than halfway, like between the tip of the snout and the back of the mouth. See where the eye is? It's a little bit past the halfway point from the front. And that tends to be where I put it. So here you can see I've switched over to the Hyro 41 nib because now I'm laying down some thicker lines, and that Leonard 111 just wasn't doing the trick. Even with the Hyro 41, as thick a line as that one will put down, I'm still, if you watch closely, you'll still see me doubling up on the lines. I'll go over the line and then go over it again. See, I've got a little ink smudge there. I put my hand down in the wet ink and I left those little marks. But that's not really an issue because you can just go right back over. I believe I just incorporated that right back into the drawing. Anytime you make a little mistake like that, don't sweat it. Just keep on going with the drawing because you can always go back. You can either use white gouache paint to cover it up, or you can scrape it out with a razor blade, which is another trick. But more often than not, you can actually just, unless it's a huge ink spill, usually you can just incorporate that mark right into, like I'm doing right there. You can incorporate it right back into the drawing, and if you didn't know that it was there, you'd never see it. People ask me all the time if I make mistakes when I draw, and well, there's proof. I make mistakes on pretty much every drawing, and you just have to get really good at hiding your mistakes or working with your mistakes. As you can see, I'm just putting a lot of ink down here on the underside of this dragon's throat. I'm just going over those lines, making very thick lines. In a couple areas here, I'm going and putting some cross lines, kind of a perpendicular pattern, just to add a little area of interest. Just like that. And of course, I'm always going back and thickening lines where I see they need thickening. What I'll do later is I'll go back and I'll cross hatch that. And I can't really do that right now because the ink is a little bit wet, So if I drag that nib across, it's going to kind of smear the ink. So I'm just going to let that part dry for a few minutes, and then I'll come back later and I'll cross hatch that. You'll see that happen here in about 5 minutes, I think. And just continuing on with the scales. Notice right here how I'm shaping these scales or scutes to kind of flow with the line of the jaw. And that's a fun thing that you can do with scales, is you can use them to exaggerate or enhance certain features of the animal. So instead of literally drawing the outline of the jaw there, I actually have the scales following that same line. And later on when I ink it, when I put the lines in, it's going to look really cool because I'll have the lines kind of swirling around following the shape of those scales. So other than that shadowed throat there, it's pretty much still outlines at this stage. Throwing in a few smaller, not really scales, it's more of like pebbled skin texture. I think if I were to extend this dragon's neck back, I would probably have the pebbled skin texture and the armor, the scutes, as you see on the head, and then I would probably fade it into scales as I went back into the neck. And I would probably use a different snake or yeah, I'd probably use snake scales as inspiration for that. Twisting and turning the drawing around so I hopefully don't get any more ink on my hand and smear it all over the paper. It actually happens at least once every drawing, I think. And right now what I'm doing is I'm putting some heavy shadow lines on the underside of each scale. Because each scale is rounded. So it's got a lit portion and a shaded portion. Even if that shadow portion is very subtle, I'm still going to call that out with the ink because it gives a nice impression of three-dimensionality and light source. So I'm just following that shadow line up the jaw. See how I'm curving those lines to follow the curve of each individual scale. Right there, I think the pen actually let go of a bunch of ink and it dropped a bunch of ink. And so I just kind of grabbed the ink with the pen and dragged it across the bottom of the scale and made that broad black line. And it worked. Maybe just a little bit more ink than I would have put down otherwise, but it's another one of those things that happens and you just roll with it. Like, okay, how do I use this? So you can see I've got the upper jaw there shaded with a heavier line, and now I'm going in obviously and doing shadow on the tongue. So I could choose to do the whole tongue in solid black because obviously it's in shadow here. But what I'm going to do is this line that I'm drawing right now, I'm going to shade the underside of the tongue below that line, and then the upper half of that tongue I will put kind of a heavy texture in there just to add some variety of texture to this drawing. Since most of it's going to be scales, the tongue offers an ability to have a different kind of texture in there. Here I'm coming in with a watercolor brush. Let's say watercolor brush number 3, so pretty small. Usually if I do brush work, I tend to use that brush. And back in with the pen. So for the narrow tip of the tongue, I'm just doing these little lines, and then I start to do these little squiggles. Just kind of a just a sketchy pattern, scribbly pattern for the tongue. I'm not being too exact with it. You can actually make a lot of really cool textures and patterns just by randomly moving the pen around in swirls and different motions like that. It doesn't always have to be neat, crisp, clear lines. It can be drag marks and all kinds of things. So that's another fun thing to play with. See, that's an interesting texture on that tongue. And then I'm going to start in here with, I believe, yeah, that's the Hunt 101 pen. It's my other favorite nib besides the Hyro 41. And I'm just going to fill some of those scales with some nice dramatic line work. Going back and thickening some of the lines. Most of the lines that I make, I tend to go back and thicken them a second or even a third time. Obviously this part is sped up way faster. And here we get back to a normal double speed. I think most of this video I've put in just double speed, but I had the camera set on hyperlapse there a few times just to cover the territory a little faster. Don't want this video to be too long. It's kind of a delicate balance because I want to accurately represent to you how fast or how slow a drawing takes, but I also don't want to bore you and have the video be too long, so I'm kind of compromising here with some sped up sections. And a different texture here on the skin. I'm sure there's a name for that skin between the upper and lower jaws. I can't recall what the name of that is, but another different texture there. And a little bit of cross hatching on the tongue just to darken that. Usually when I draw something, a face with an eye, I usually start with the eye, so it's unusual that I didn't actually completely ink around this eye until now. That's something that I would normally start with the eye and kind of work out. Notice I leave the eye blank without a pupil. I do that a lot when I draw dragons. I just think it makes it look more menacing when it doesn't have a pupil, and so it's just a matter of personal taste. But there are some times where I do put a vertical pupil or a round pupil in the dragon's eye. It really does change the look quite a bit. And yeah, this time I chose to leave it white. So you can see how I'm kind of leaving the upper portion of a lot of these scales white to indicate reflected light. And I'm darkening here the very top, the upper portion of the teeth. I'm putting solid black, and then just a few little touches of ink down the tooth just to indicate some texture there. See how dropping that shadow down really makes that tooth, the teeth pop out nice. And these lower teeth, what I'm doing is thickening that line on the left side of the teeth, the inside, to indicate shadow. And just following along with that same technique. Notice there's no straight lines. Lines are all curved. The thing about lines is they have a definite energy to them, and you can convey a lot with a line or lines. You can show motion, you can show texture, you can show shape, and you really, after a while, you sort of develop just a feel for it. It's something that I don't necessarily even think about as I'm drawing. I'm just sort of imagining that I'm tracing this three-dimensional shape, and like where can this line go to make a really interesting image here. I kind of like the way that those ripply lines up there right behind the eye came out. It looks really cool. So with the exception of the beginning where I was using the Leonard 111, I've done this entire drawing with just two nibs and a little bit with a brush. And that really highlights how much I love dip pens. They're so versatile. It would be really hard to do this with only 2 microns. You could do it, definitely could, but you'd be going over a lot of those lines quite a bit to get that sort of thickness and density of black. But you absolutely could do this with microns. I've used microns in the past to do the same style, and it just takes a lot more work. And I think I've killed many micron pens, just exhausted the ink in them doing this type of work. That's looking pretty good. It's looking pretty good. See how I'm using those lines to just follow the curve of those scutes, those scales, and it has a nice flow to it. It has a nice energy to it. So this video is about 28 minutes long, but really, I think the actual time was probably about an hour and 20 minutes just for the inking, hour and a half maybe. So it's a pretty good investment of time. I do ink really fast though. I've been doing this type of inking for 20 years. So try not to get discouraged when you look at this and think, man, that's fast work. Speed comes with time, and speed comes with practice, but it's not about speed. And I'm not rushing at all. It's just the natural speed that I work at now. But I'm never hurrying when I ink. That's never something I do. I like to sit down just in the quiet or have some nice music on and relax. Gotta have fun while you're creating. See how this cross hatching here really adds some nice depth of tone. I really like the way that looks. Now I'm coming in with the fine tip of that 101, and I'm just doing shadow marks here. I'm just doing hatching to indicate the shape of those teeth behind the teeth on the other side of the jaws. And the lack of an outline on those teeth really gives the impression that that's in the background. There we have it. It looks pretty good. What I'm going to do next, after I put a few more scratch marks in here, I'm going to ink that little bit of drool that I have indicated there. You have some drool coming down, and then I'll end up doing a little bit of a frame around it as well. But as the video's coming to a close here, I just wanted to thank you all again for your support here on Patreon, and looking forward to doing even more videos. I've got a long list now of different videos that I'm looking forward to doing for you guys, and just a nice variety of things. So I hope you're getting a lot out of these videos, and as I've said before, if there's anything else that you'd like to see that you're not seeing, or you'd like me to touch on some concepts as I do these videos, just give a holler. You can direct message me here on Patreon or leave a comment under the videos, and I will definitely take a look at any and all suggestions, and most likely get to them eventually. So really appreciate all the comments and the likes and all the feedback too. And there's that outline I was talking about. Instead of just doing a rectangular outline, I'm just putting like a suggestion of some clouds there or something, just to break up the rectangle. There it is. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.